Hello, beloved. I am Pastor VictorResendiz. Welcome to this weekly series called God is Love, conversations on compassion, justice, and spirituality. Each week, we will explore our role as Christian believers in today's national dialogue around race and racism. We'll be joined by Liz Peterson, Assistant Director of Houston Coalition Against Hate, a network of organizations, institutions, and individuals committed to preventing and addressing all forms of hate in our community. We invite you to listen for the transforming Word of God, as together we seek to fully embody the great commandment to love God and love neighbor. Well, hello, everyone. This is our last conversation of the second round of God is Love. Can you believe that? Liz, my goodness. This makes 10 conversations that we've had. And I hope and I pray that if you've been following us, thank you so much. If you haven't gotten a chance to listen to these conversations, just engage in one of them. You don't necessarily have to start from the beginning. All of them have the same component. It's an education piece and then a piece for you to reflect with in the spiritual part of our presentations. And it's just been such an honor to do this with Liz. Thank you so much, Liz, for everything that you bring to the table every week. And so, again, I'm honored to be partnering up with you in this effort, right, to bring some conversation starters, some things that people can really sit with and consume and digest, and allow God to be the one that prompts their heart, right, and motivates them and encourages them to be open. Right, to just be open. So again, thanks. This is our last conversation. Like I said, for this second round, Liz and I are gonna take a hiatus to continue to prepare more material. There's some great ideas coming out of this that we are wanting to put together for all of you. So in January, we will be making our third round of the God is Love series. So again, thank you so much for all your questions, all your feedback, your emails, and continue to send them to us as we move forward. So Liz, what do you have for us today?
Well, I thought that since we won't be meeting again through the end of the year, but we've got a time when we have a lot more family conversations. Well, this is going to be a different kind of year. Thanksgiving and Christmas are probably going to look a lot different than the previous, but it's still a time. And as this will be airing on Election Day, we have no idea what's going to happen. There may be continued conversations. And I just wanted to give our listeners the opportunity to hear some ways that they can interact with the common ways that people respond to allegations of racism. Both so that you can examine your own heart and where does that resistance come up in you, and then also so that you can have some talking points and know where to go when someone might bring up an offensive or a resistant to racist remark. And the important thing, this is one of the main ways that we as white people can ally, serve as accomplices with Black people and other people of color by interrupting these little instances of racism in our daily life and offering a slight pushback, a gentle, maybe you didn't know, or, guess what I learned that has really changed my opinion about these things. Further ado, I'm always loving Father Richard Rohr, and I just wanted to get started with this quote from him. He did a great interview in Sojourners magazine in 2016, and I included the whole thing, but I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. But I love that he talked, at the beginning, he said a lot of difficult things about privilege that we've talked about previously in our God is Love series, and he talks about his own personal fear that people will hate him. And I so want to be loved, he says. And isn't that how we all feel? We want to be loved. We want to be good. And I say all people, and I don't know what all people are like because I have my limited life experience, but he says, isn't that a very white need to be liked? The white need to be proper and avoid conflict, the white need to advance at all costs, that strange need for entitlement that all egos love and seek, that is isolating us separating us from love, from healing, and from community. Talks about naively having thought racism was behind us, but thinking much clearer now. So setting a model that it's okay to change your mind frame, and that education is the best doorway to help those of us who think we are not racist, to recognize that structurally and often unconsciously we still are. So to get started, one of the main things that happens when white people are confronted with the idea of racism is denial, right? Ibram X. Kendi, in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, had a great quote. He says, "Denial is the heartbeat of racism, beating across ideologies, races, and nations. It is beating within us. How often do we become reflexively defensive when someone calls something we've done or said racist? How many of us would agree with this statement? Racist isn't a descriptive word, it's a pejorative word. It is the equivalent of saying, I don't like you." And that is such a barrier in our conversations around racism, to just think that being called racist is the worst thing in the world. It is a descriptive word. It's something that exists, and if we can, pause in that denial for just a bit and think about some facts that we may not have known, we can have a more nuanced conversation. So what does denial sound like? It might sound like slavery was over a long time ago. Discrimination is a thing of the past. Racism was fixed in the 60s with the civil rights movement and law. We have a level playing field now. And is that true? Was slavery over a long time ago? Well, if you look at this timeline of American slavery and segregation, you can see that racism, there's a stand-up comedian, and he makes a joke about how long ago did racism happen? I mean, it happened like 3 people ago, like 3 generations ago, people were enslaved. Yeah. That's not a very long time, And when you see pictures of someone like Ruby Bridges, who was desegregating schools, and she's now in her 60s, I believe, like, that's not old, So this didn't happen a long time ago. This is contemporary history, and American slavery lasted almost 250 years. And it has only been 100 years, 50 years, I don't know, I can't do math in my head, but 60 years, 70 years since segregation even ended. And if you look at 1954, I think that's a kind of weird place to stop, because segregation, certainly everything hasn't been hunky-dory since 1954. So I found this other timeline of white supremacy, which I think adds like a much more nuanced perspective. And it looks at Jim Crow and segregation and how that lasted through the mid-60s, how disenfranchisement, the war on drugs, mass incarceration picked up where that left off. Convict leasing, which is something that's very near and dear to my heart, picked up immediately after slavery ended to reincarcerate or to re-subjugate Black men into the fields and the mines and the mills that were dangerous jobs that you couldn't pay people to do. So the other thing people say is discrimination is history, and I just took a moment to pull some headlines from my Facebook page. If you're following this, you're welcome to follow me. You will see some posts you might not like, and I think you can handle that. You might see some posts of my daughter that you will like. But these are headlines just in my timeline since July 2020 about being a Black bank customer trying to cash a check and they call 911. Racial disparities seen in how doctors treat pain, even among children. Black newborns 3 times more likely to die when looked after by white doctors. Student debt is fueling the Black-white wealth gap, and pursuing a college degree has become racialized. White people own 98% of rural land. Black people are still dying of cancer at the highest rates, and a neighborhood's race affects home values more now than in 1980. These are all ways that discrimination is manifesting itself right now. So another thing that we do when we're confronted with ideas about racism is minimize the problem. Like, racism isn't a big problem anymore. Sure, it exists, but it isn't a big problem. And this is how where you would come from with a rebuttal. So the median wealth of Black families is 2% of the median wealth of white families. Non-white school districts get $23 billion less funding than white ones, and Black people make up 13% of the population, but 40% of the prison population. So yes, racism is still a problem. Another way we minimize it, we say it's not that bad. You know, it was way worse before. But just because we don't experience the negative realities of racism doesn't mean that it's not a problem anymore. So if Black people are telling you racism is bad and that is their lived experience, I encourage you to take stock in that. You can also say there are worse places in the world. Certainly there are places where there's horrible poverty, horrible sickness, war, we get it. But if your child was the one being treated unfairly every day because of the color of their skin, if your son or husband or brother is the one that is deathly afraid of being pulled over by the cops, you will think that the problem is actually that bad. Another thing that we do is we make excuses. We say Black people are poor because they're not trying hard enough. And that's easy to buy into it. That gets into the myth of meritocracy we talked about previously. It gets into the idea that, well, I worked hard for what I had. And so if I was able to work hard and move myself up, everyone can. And we need to understand that when we live in a society that has institutions that are designed to benefit white people while oppressing people of color, sometimes trying can only get you so far. We'll also say if Black people just acted better, they could rise above the oppression. And that's a myth. It's a myth to say that there's a way that Black people can act that won't incur racism. Very nice, very respectful Black people are subject to racism every day. I just read a story this weekend about a very sweet family in New York has had for decades a little cottage in a cute little beach town. They've been the chair of fundraising and community events and picnics, and everybody loves them. And they came home not too long ago with the N-word written on their doorstep. Yeah. And they thought it could never happen to them because they were just as nice as could be, and it can happen to anyone.
Well, let me just stop you there for a second. I had actually witnessed that together. We were at the same place at one time, and we met that Black couple. And remember that the woman was a pharmacist. And remember what she said? That her experience was that anybody that walked into the pharmacy would always ask for a pharmacist. And then whenever she would say, well, I'm the pharmacist in charge here, they would have a second guessing in their face, like they couldn't believe it. And I remember that it was a very heartfelt story that she was sharing with both of us, and her husband was there. And just the way she was saying, I didn't realize that this is still happening, until now that we're having this conversation. And then she's telling her story to us. And then it dawned on her, like, racism's still very well alive, right? Do you remember that story?
Yeah, I do remember that conversation.
Correct. So that's impacting that, for people to be under the impression or dismiss that doesn't exist anymore. And then even so much so that in some cases, like her, she says, if I wouldn't have engaged in conversation with, because I remember, I think it all started with asking you what you did for the convict leasing project. And then that's how all these conversations came about. And that's when she said, if it wasn't for this conversation, it's almost like it's become a norm that that's how I'm treated, right? That's powerful. That's very powerful. Yeah. Go ahead. It reminded me of that.
No, thank you. Love it. Yeah. And a lot of people would say when you walk up to the Black pharmacist, ask to speak to the pharmacist, and have a sort of shocked response, well, I didn't mean anything by it, because of course you didn't mean anything by it. Sure. But does that matter if that, like, think about her experiencing that,
Yes.
And And so this goes to right what I was talking about, because, this is, like I said, I'm also trying to coach you as the listener. How can I interrupt racism? And one thing you're going to hear time and time again is, I didn't mean it like that. And that's great. We don't have to be angry. We don't have to be shaming people, but we just, we as white people need to figure out that we are often unconscious of our racism, and we don't mean to be racist or say or do racist things. But if we do it regardless of our intention, it's still there. It still hurts. It's like when you're dancing and you step on your partner's toes. Like, of course you didn't mean to. What kind of weirdo would you be? But you stepped on their toe, you caused pain, and you have to acknowledge that. This is not to say that the pain of racism is the same as the pain of being stepped on your toe, but you get the analogy there, that whether or not you're intending it, the impact is what really matters. But sometimes we just need to see our unconscious racism in order to change it. And that happened to me one time. I think I may have even told this story on the podcast. I know I've told it at Memorial Drive a couple of times, but I was having work done on my house. And this was when I first started into anti-racism, but I was very focused on it. I was already working with Grapple at Memorial Drive. And I saw a Black man walking down the street and then turn and walk right into my backyard. And my first reaction was, what is he doing back there? And I hopped out, and I wasn't going to call the cops, but I had that amount of self-awareness, but I was going to confront him. And, I just sort of said, well, excuse me, can I help you? And he, it turned out that he was a subcontractor from my general contractor fixing the windows, and he had cut me a great deal, and he was doing a wonderful job. And every time my contractor told me about this wonderful worker that this company that he'd employed to do the windows, I just imagined an old white guy. And so to be confronted with a Black man younger than myself, I wasn't expecting that. And that's not to say that I'll never do anything like that again, but to take the opportunity to see where your unconscious bias is manifesting itself can be very eye-opening and can help you to do better in the future, which is what we're all about. Another thing is, we say, so-and-so is a good person, and good people can't be racist. We act as if there's a good-bad binary, and we all know that there's no one is entirely good, no one is entirely bad. And of course, racism manifests itself in individual acts, but acts are part of a larger system that we all participate in. And the focus on individual instances of racism, well, I know, boy, my neighbor is so racist. He has a Confederate flag on his car, and he uses the N-word all the time. Focusing on that kind of racism makes us feel good, because I don't have a Confederate flag and I'd never use the N-word. But we need to move beyond that to look at the larger system that we need to challenge, and to think about the ways that good people make bad choices or do bad things all the time. And the other thing is a competing victimization. We think about how what we feel. There's a sense that I get sometimes that we white people feel like we're under attack now, and that it's not okay to be white, and we need to defend ourselves from that. And I really liked this post from a trainer, educator, author, Rachel Elizabeth Cargill, who's talking about, if you have a knee-jerk reaction to the term Black Lives Matter, to demand the focus not be on one group, but be inclusive of all people, I want you to sit with that for a moment. As a white person, nearly all the time we are represented. Nearly all the time we are feeling comfortable. So if we feel so negatively about being left out or not fairly included, imagine how minority and marginalized groups feel all the time when their needs aren't considered in major decisions and conversations and actions. So it says, so when you feel the need to toss the word all into anything that is looking to serve the needs of a marginalized group, you aren't actually asking for inclusivity. You're demanding to be centered yet again.
Yeah. Wow. Just, you know, this is such great information, and it's very friendly user. That's one of the things that I have really enjoyed about your presentation. So thank you again for making it that simplified, yet it is profound information to chew on. You know, when I was thinking about even the joke that Dion Cole said about, you know, 3 people ago was slavery, I was thinking about how subtle things are in the way we are, the way we are sort of subtly being able to set up our minds and this dismissive attitude towards racism and towards you know, slavery. All these things have just eased in our culture. And here's where I'm going. I'm getting a little tangled up with where I'm going. But so when you were talking about the historic part of segregation and all that, it's really interesting because if you look at pop culture, just TV, and I'm gonna use a couple of shows as an example, and I've shared this with you before offline. In the 70s, there was this awakening to sort of this inclusive awakening to really have shows that represented all the faces that the United States had, right? So you had shows like Good Times that were very clear, and they were non-apologetic about what was going on in the projects. And in this case, the show took place in Chicago. And the problems with police brutality, I mean, the things that we're talking about even now, and they were part of the script, and they were very unapologetic and very blunt and very in your face. You know, and if you watch that show, it looked like a play, right? So you had that, and then you had All in the Family, another show that was pretty blunt about society and the perspective of differences in racism and racism, I'm sorry. And they were very powerful, and they were speaking a truth that was very moving to people, and people were being awoken, if that's even a word, or they were being, you know, they were awaking to this reality of what was happening, right? But it seemed like the intention of these directors in these productions were leaning towards some unification, like let's understand each other's problems and the depth of it, and then let's move towards each other so we can understand each other. But somewhere down the line, I'm thinking that things got a little bit threatening for Hollywood. And so they started to water down the shows. So then we had the Cosby Show, right? An acceptable, professional, you know, doctor, and his wife is an attorney. And that was more accepting, right? For even for the white community to accept a Black family in their TV, in their living room, you know, during a TV show. And then all of a sudden, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and you start seeing sort of this watered down, or sort of like just more softer part of what a Black family represented, or a Black individual. And so all these other raw ways of confronting the truth of what was going on that the 70s was willing to open themselves up to, all of a sudden it just got lost. And so it seems like the history keeps repeating itself. Every time there's a rise of this unity and understanding of the blunt reality, then no, that's too much for us. And then we start simmering it down, especially the powers to be that can do that. Start simmering it down and just kind of selling it down. And I can say the same thing about rap music. You know, during the early 90s, you had these rap groups that came out, and they were very blunt in their lyrics about what was going on in the hood. And, you know, and when we had the Rodney King case, everybody was surprised that it was caught on video except the Black community. And these Black rappers were saying, we've been telling you all along that this is true. This is what's happening, right? And so rap became very controversial and very threatening to the white communities. The interesting thing is that for the most part, most of the records that they were selling was to the white suburban kids, right? They loved this kind of music. And so, but they were telling the truth, and all at that time, what they were trying to point out is that this was violent gang music. And it wasn't. what they were saying is, look, we've been telling you guys, this has been going on in our streets, in our neighborhoods, and you have not been listening. And so now you're surprised about Rodney King, you know? And so same thing. And now if you look at rap music nowadays, it's been watered down so much that that message is not out anymore. If anything, I like what I saw a video from a music critic, classic music critic, that said, you know, rap music used to say something about the drug dealer. Now the rap music, unfortunately, has turned around to the drug use. And that's the difference now. But what, you know, and this black music critic was saying, but what it does is just settling down the black community, like saying, well, see, they're drug users. So it just lends itself for this narrative. So, you know, pop culture has a major power to influence of how we see a narrative. You know, of course, we can talk about news, you know, but depending on which news channel you're watching, it has a different agenda. But pop culture is something that can be educational if you pay attention to it as well. That there is this part of the black community trying to get their message out, but the powers to be seem to kind of settle it down so that it won't be that the black experience is living it in. And so that's what I was thinking about when you were doing the timelines with us. It's like there's always been this again, this rise, but then there's this oppression to kind of settle it down. We don't need to hear that. We don't want to confront that because we're good people. We're good Americans. This is a great country. It's the greatest country in the world. And in a way, it's it's what you just presented to as a denial part. And that's very unhealthy, you know? So anyway, any feedback, any thoughts? That was running in my mind as you were presenting to us.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting to think about. And you're much more savvy about pop culture than I am. But yeah, I do think that denial, you know, it is a cycle, and it is self-preservation. And we talked about that a little bit last week.
Sure.
And you know, I think that if we focus on how much richer we can become as a people by expanding our worldview and our understanding and our tastes, I think that, you know, we can overcome that inherent tendency to want to just go back to the old days when these things weren't a problem for us.
Yeah. And you know what, Liz, I think also what happens is we believe this narrative for so long. You know, you and I have worked in different fields, so to speak. I know you did journalism for a long time, right? So you were in the midst of how these stories unfold and develop. And I'm pretty sure you could tell stories how they're manipulated as well. On my side, you know, working in education, I worked as a social worker for a while. And I grew up in you know, in low income neighborhoods. And the wonderful families and friends of mine that I still have from childhood, it's just a beautiful place, you know, to grow up, right? No, we didn't have all the material things that supposedly you need, right, or whatever. But the unity that was in the neighborhoods was very, very evident. Where I'm going with this is that when I hear the news or anybody pitching out these bad neighborhoods, you know, and there's crime there and there's delinquency, yes, there is. But at the same time, I know plenty of beautiful families that live in these neighborhoods that are only trying to make it. And it's not their choice that they live there. This is the only thing that they can afford and can provide for their families at that moment. Shoot, I come from that kind of family. It just so happens that my trajectory moved somewhere else because of mentoring, other things that kind of came into my life that allow me to seize opportunities. But other than that, I know a lot of families that still are in the neighborhood. You know, my mom still lives in the same house that we grew up in. And some of the neighborhoods that have been there since we were kids, I mean, they're loving. And so it's also what I think is allowing ourselves to open ourselves up to believe that part of the story too, instead of just believing what we're being fed. And especially if I've never even come out of my own neighborhood and think that just by watching the news, that's where my information should be reliable. That's not the case, you know. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but to me that that breaks my heart sometimes to hear those expressions about poor neighborhoods, because they're always identified as bad or delinquents or gang infested, and that's not the case. That's very minimum compared to how many great families live in those neighborhoods.
Absolutely. And, of course, that's also ignoring the fact those neighborhoods are impoverished because they've been starved of resources.
Yes.
Because that's places where jobs are not plentiful and where transportation is not easily available, and where schools are given the bare minimum of support.
That's right.
And so to label a community and all its population as bad really absolves. And that gets into the whole idea of gentrification, which is something that you're seeing in your mother's neighborhood. They've suddenly built some really nice roads, some really nice bike paths, and coincidentally, of course, development of expensive housing is moving into that area.
That's right.
That's in the southwest part of the city, and it's sort of an untapped, closer than Pearland. 288 getting expanded, and so all of this is connected. And it's a lot more that we can explore in just an hour or 40 minutes. But I hope that when we say these things, it gives people the impetus to educate yourself, like do some Google searches.
That's right.
We can't educate you about everything, but when you start uncoding some of these things, what do we mean when we say bad neighborhood?
That's right.
What do we mean when we say gentrification? Like, am I a bad person if I bought a house and I'm a white person in a historically Latino neighborhood? Not necessarily, but am I a bad person if I bought a house and start calling the police because they're playing music at 11 o'clock on a Saturday and I don't like that? Maybe if I'm bringing law enforcement into a situation where people can be harmed.
Correct.
So it's a complicated dynamic, but.
Yes, it is. Well, and what we're trying to encourage everyone that's been tuning into these conversations is exactly what Liz just said. Nowadays we have a push of a button and you can get all sorts of information. So yes, educate yourself, please. We're encouraging you to do so. Become an astute individual, and mostly we're encouraging you to become an astute believer of Christ. My political party, the way I was brought up, the way Uncle so-and-so expressed himself, that cannot continue to be my actual resource. What is Christ? What is the behavior of Christ? What did Christ represent? What did Christ embody? And if I'm a believer of Christ, that's what I need to lean towards in. And it will compromise some of the things that I thought I knew, but that's okay. It's called maturity. It's called breakthrough. It's called overcoming things that have been unhealthy even in me, right? So we want to encourage you to move towards that. I want to share this quote that I found, and I couldn't find who wrote it. I just saw it on my Facebook page, but it says, being taught to avoid talking about politics and religion has led to a lack of understanding of politics and religion. What we should have been taught was how to have a civil conversation about a difficult topic. And I want to share something with you. So I belong to this vision committee for the school district, and we're doing these exercises when we're meeting of what is the ideal or the dream that we have for our children, right, in the school district. And so we throw all these really fancy words, perseverance, successful, what is the other one? Integrity. I mean, you name them, they're all there. And so when we did our group dynamics, what I did with, they ask you to select certain traits and then for you to place them, and you have up to 5 to select that are considered as a foundation for the children to sort of be influenced by or to have, right, in order to be successful in life. And so one of the things that I told my group is that what I did, I looked at all those traits and I selected the 5 that I can model in my own life. What am I modeling as part of society? What am I modeling as part of a citizen of this community? If as an adult, I don't carry those traits, I'm not gonna bring those as a recipe to the children that I'm trying to, speak for, or to try to, in this case, have a vision for. And so I think it's also this, what I'm trying to say is that we are old enough to be responsible. And so we can be civil. We can lean in towards listening to one another when it comes to these difficult conversations. We are in a difficult time, but that does not excuse for us to continue to sort of have this divisive attitude, because when it comes down to it, it's a very immature attitude to have. So we have the resilience to be adults and to act like adults, and that means to be mature enough to have civil conversations and to listen. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you got to convince me about your point of view or I have to convince you about mine, but we can definitely lean towards each other to listen, because we're modeling to our children. They're watching us. And so, so again, I go back to believers of Christ is what are we really following Christ for? What's our priority, right? Any closing thoughts on that?
I think you said it so well. I don't know what I could add to that.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate you cheerleading me. I can't thank you enough, Liz. I know you and I are going to sit. We got a couple of things that we've been brainstorming about and to do for the next round of conversations. But I can't thank you enough. I think everything you brought to the table has been so valuable. And I cannot get tired of repeating myself. If you have not engaged in any of these conversations, pick up wherever you like, and you'll find plenty of great information and encouraging words for you to, again, lean towards this material and present it in front of God and see where God wants to prompt your heart. And so we just want to encourage you to keep doing it. During the holidays that are coming up, this is a great opportunity to practice what you've been learning. This is a great opportunity for you to be attentive to staying open, to practice your spiritual practices in prayer before a family reunion, before you're going to get together with some friends that you might not, you might not see the same things as far as whether it's the political picture or whether it's this topic on social justice. And allow yourself to be open to learn, allow yourself open to lean towards listening. Allow yourself to maybe not be right for the first time. That's okay. And just be attentive to that. See where God wants to take you, where God wants to chisel or open you up in a new way during the holidays. This is a great opportunity to see what happens. And this is where breakthroughs happen and where genuine transformation happens. Don't you agree, Liz?
Absolutely. I totally agree.
So we definitely want to encourage you to do that. Keep having these conversations with those people that are willing to have them already. I'm sure you have a group of people that are like-minded, and then just kind of invite each other to how much deeper can you go with the material that Liz has presented to us through these conversations, and then some of the things that God is inviting you and calling you to just consider. So we love you all very much. Thank you again for tuning in, for being a part of this. Liz, I will see you in 2021.
Yes. Thank goodness it will not be 2020 anymore.
I know. I hope it's, somebody said that 2020, they hope that 2020 was not a trailer of 2021.
Oh, right.
So anyways, well, thank you all for being a part of God is Love. We look forward to seeing you next year. And again, if you have any questions, you want to reach out to us, have any comments, any feedback, or any topics that you'd like for us to bring to the table, we'd be happy to accommodate. Just send us an email and we'll be happy, or give me a call at the church. I'll be happy to have a phone conversation with you as well. Thanks again, Liz.
Yes, thank you. And thank everybody for listening.
Excellent. Well, we'll see you guys. Shalom. As always, have a blessed week, and just be prayerful about everything that's going on. And mainly just lean towards where God wants to take you. All right. You guys take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
We are so glad you joined us for this week's conversation. You're invited to leave any comments or questions in the comments below. I want to leave you with these encouraging words from Jesus from the Sermon of the Mount. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. We'll see you next time.